The pale blue alien's question hung in the air like a spark that could ignite a fire that would consume the entire Zephyrian Empire, and King Vorthak stared at his subject with the dawning realization that something fundamental had just changed. In his throne room, "You dare question my orders," the king snarled. But there was uncertainty in his voice that had never been there before, because in all his years of rule, no conquered being had ever asked to learn anything except how to serve better. The blue-skinned alien trembled but did not step back, and his large eyes met the king's gaze with something that looked remarkably like courage. "Forgive me, your majesty, but these humans speak of ideas I have never heard before, and my curiosity compels me to understand what they mean." Lisa felt her heart racing as she realized that her gamble was working and that the simple act of planting questions in fertile minds was already beginning to bear fruit. Another alien stepped forward, and this one was tall and thin, with skin like polished silver, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving complex problems. "Your Majesty, I am Chief Engineer Zilak, and I have served your empire faithfully for 30 years. But I must admit that these humans have introduced concepts that intrigue my scientific mind." King Vorthak's 6 eyes blazed with fury as he watched more of his subjects step forward with questions and comments, and for the first time in his reign, he faced something more dangerous than any weapon. Dr. Amy Foster spoke from her energy cage, and her voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had dedicated her life to healing others. "Your Majesty, if I may be permitted to demonstrate the power of shared knowledge, I would like to offer medical assistance to any of your subjects who might benefit from human healing techniques." The king turned toward her with his crystalline teeth bared in a snarl. But before he could speak, one of the alien guards lowered his weapon and addressed the human doctor. "My daughter suffers from a wasting disease that our physicians cannot cure," the guard said. "Could your knowledge help her?" Amy's response was immediate and filled with the compassion that made humans dangerous to tyrants everywhere. "I would be honored to try," she said. "Medical knowledge belongs to all sentient beings, and no child should suffer when help is available." The guard looked back and forth between his king and the human doctor, and Lisa could see the exact moment when his loyalty shifted from fear-based obedience to something far more powerful. Engineer Pete Collins added his voice to the growing chorus of offers. "We have agricultural techniques that could increase food production on your worlds, and we have manufacturing processes that could improve the quality of life for everyone in your empire." More aliens stepped forward now, and their questions came faster, as if a dam had burst, and decades of suppressed curiosity were finally flowing free. "Could you teach us to read and write these ideas?" asked a small alien with feathered skin and bright, intelligent eyes. "Do you really share your knowledge with other species for free?" wondered a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. "What does it mean to have rights that cannot be taken away?" asked the blue alien who had started this revolution with his simple question. King Vorthak rose from his throne, and his massive frame seemed to fill the entire room. But for the first time, his subjects did not cower away from his anger. "Silence!" he roared. "You forget your place and your duty to serve your emperor without question." But Lisa noticed that several of the aliens continued, talking among themselves in low voices as if the king's commands no longer carried the absolute authority they once possessed. Security Chief Rick Barnes spoke in a voice that carried the quiet strength of someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others. Your Majesty, we humans believe that every being has the right to ask questions and seek knowledge, and no ruler should fear educated subjects unless his rule depends on their ignorance. The words hit their target like precision. Weapons and King Vorthak stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck because Rick had just spoken aloud the truth that every tyrant fears. Most. Lisa stepped forward within her energy cage and held up her pen one final time. This is why humanity spread so quickly across the galaxy. Your Majesty, because we do not conquer worlds. We liberate them by sharing the most dangerous weapon ever created. She paused and looked around the throne room at the faces of beings who were experiencing hope for the first time in decades. We share the idea that every sentient being deserves freedom and dignity and the right to determine their own destiny. The revolution that followed was unlike any in galactic history because it involved no violence, and no destruction of property, and no armies marching across battlefields stained with blood. Instead, it was a revolution of minds that spread through the Zephyrian fleet like ripples in a pond, as beings who had accepted slavery as inevitable suddenly realized that they had choices they had never imagined. The ship's communication systems carried conversations between species that had not been allowed to speak to each other for generations, and these conversations were full of questions about freedom and rights and the possibility of a different kind of future. Engineers shared technical knowledge that improved working conditions throughout the fleet, while medical personnel offered healing techniques that saved lives regardless of species or status. Most importantly, teachers appeared among the conquered beings, and they began the slow, careful work of helping others learn to read and write so that dangerous ideas could spread even faster. King Vorthak found himself increasingly isolated. As his own guards began to question orders, and his engineers started implementing improvements that benefited everyone rather than just their masters. The final blow came when his own son, Prince Vorthak, approached the energy cages where the humans were held and asked Lisa to teach him how to write. "I want to record the stories of our conquered peoples," the prince said, "so that their cultures and histories will not be lost even if they choose to leave our empire." Lisa smiled and accepted the prince's pen and paper and began teaching him the letters that would spell the end of tyranny and the beginning of something beautiful. Within days, the Zephyrian Empire began to transform from within as beings who had lived in fear discovered the joy of cooperation and the power of shared knowledge. The humans were released from their cages, not as an act of mercy, but as honored guests invited to help build a better future for all the species in the galaxy. Jake Morrison found himself working alongside former enemies to establish the first interspecies council dedicated to promoting freedom and education throughout the known worlds. And at the center of it all was a simple ballpoint pen that had proven mightier than any sword, and more dangerous to tyrants than the most advanced weapons of war. Lisa kept that pen for the rest of her life, and she used it to write the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights that became the foundation for a new age of cooperation among the stars. The document began with 3 simple words that changed everything: "We are free." And it ended with a promise that no being would ever again face the choice between slavery and death. King Vorthak abdicated his throne and spent his remaining years learning to read so that he could understand the weapon that had defeated him without firing a single shot. The weapon was not the pen itself, but the ideas it could preserve and share, and the recognition that in a universe full of wonders, the greatest wonder of all was the simple truth that every being deserved the chance to dream of something better. The throne room of King Vorthak stretched before them like a cathedral built to worship power and cruelty, and everywhere Jake looked, he saw evidence of the alien empire's conquests, from the crystallized remains of beings who had dared to resist, to weapons taken from defeated armies that now served as decorations for the king's amusement. King Vorthak himself sat upon a throne carved from what looked like a single massive diamond, and he was even larger than his soldiers, standing at least 15 feet tall with 6 arms instead of 4, and armor that seemed to be made from the compressed cores of dead stars, and when he spoke, his voice shook the very walls of his ship. So these are the humans who think they can explore our galaxy without permission, the king said, and his words carried the weight of absolute authority backed by the power to destroy worlds. Bring me their leader so I may examine this new species before I decide their fate. Commander Thrax pushed Jake forward with one of his 4 hands, and Jake found himself standing alone before the most powerful being he had ever encountered, while his crew watched from energy cages that had been erected along the walls of the throne room. I am Jake Morrison, captain of the Earth vessel, Horizon's Edge, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm him. We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship among the stars. King Vorthak leaned forward on his throne, and his 6 eyes studied Jake with the intensity of a predator examining prey, and when he smiled, his teeth were like crystalline daggers that caught the light from the alien stars, visible through the throne room's massive windows. Peace, the king repeated, and the word sounded like mockery when spoken in his harsh voice. Your species has spread across 53 star systems in less than 2 centuries human, and you tell me you come in peace. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the aliens had been watching humanity's expansion into space and counting their colonies and calculating their strength, and he wondered how long they had been preparing for this moment. We explore to learn, Jake said. We settle new worlds to give our people room to grow, and we share our knowledge with any species willing to exchange ideas with us. The king's laughter was like the sound of glaciers breaking, and it echoed through the throne room, making all the alien courtiers step back in, fear of their master's amusement. You share knowledge, the king said. How generous of such a young species, but you forget that knowledge belongs to the strong, and we are the strongest beings in this galaxy. Around the throne room stood dozens of alien species, and Jake realized with growing horror that most of them were not Zephyrians, but members of conquered races forced to serve their new masters, and he could see the fear in their eyes and the way they flinched whenever the king's attention turned their way. Your species intrigues me, human, King Vorthak continued. You have no natural weapons like claws or fangs, and your bodies are weak compared to most sentient races, yet you have spread farther and faster than species twice your age. The king gestured with one of his 6 arms, and a holographic display appeared, showing human colonies scattered across the galaxy like points of light in the darkness. This rapid expansion suggests you possess weapons of great power, the king said. Secret technologies that allow you to defeat stronger opponents, and I want those weapons for my empire. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized what the alien king was really after, and he knew that no amount of explanation would convince. This creature that humanity's success came from cooperation rather than superior firepower. We have no secret weapons, Jake said. Our strength comes from working together and sharing knowledge and helping each other survive in a hostile universe, King. Vorthak's expression darkened, and his 6 eyes glowed brighter with anger at what he clearly saw as an attempt to deceive him. "Do not lie to me, human!" The king roared, and his voice was like thunder that made the entire throne room tremble. "No! Species spreads across the galaxy through cooperation alone, and I have studied your military history." The holographic display changed to show images of human conflicts from Earth's past, and Jake saw battles and wars and weapons of destruction. That made him understand why the aliens might think humanity was naturally violent. "Your species has a talent for war." The king continued, "You fight with cunning and determination, and you never surrender, even when facing overwhelming odds. And these traits suggest powerful weapons hidden somewhere in your arsenal." Jake looked at his crew trapped in their energy cages and saw Lisa watching him with intense concentration, as if she was trying to tell him something with her eyes alone, and he wondered what the diplomatic expert was thinking as she listened to this exchange. "I will make you an offer, human," King Vorthak said, leaning back on his throne. "Reveal the location of your secret weapons and the technology behind them, and I will allow your crew to live as slaves in my empire." The king paused, and his smile grew wider, showing more of those crystalline teeth that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. "Refuse my generous offer, and I will execute your crew one by one, while you watch. And then I will send my fleet to your homeworld and turn its surface into glass." Jake felt the weight of his crew's lives pressing down on him like a physical force, and he knew that whatever he said next would determine the fate of not just the people in this room, but potentially all of humanity. "I need time to consider your offer," Jake said, hoping to buy them some breathing room to think of a way out of this impossible situation. But King Vorthak shook his massive head, and his 6 eyes burned with impatience. "Time is a luxury I do not grant to conquered species human, and you will give me your answer now, or watch your crew begin to die." The king gestured, and one of his guards moved toward the energy cages where Jake's crew was imprisoned, and Jake saw the alien soldier raise a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. "Wait!" Jake called out, but he knew he had no weapons to offer and no secret technology to trade for their lives. King Vorthak held up one of his 6 hands, and the guard stopped, but kept his weapon trained on the nearest prisoner, who happened to be Dr. Amy Foster. "Choose quickly, human," the king said. "Your weapons or your crew's lives, but you cannot have both." Jake looked desperately around, the throne room searching for any sign of hope or help. But all he saw were the faces of conquered beings who had learned that resistance was futile and submission was the only path to survival. Then his eyes met Lisa's, and he saw something there. That surprised him, because instead of fear or despair, he saw calculation and planning, as if she was working on a solution to their impossible situation. "I am waiting, human," King Vorthak said, and his voice carried a note of finality that suggested his patience was at an end. "Give me your weapons or watch your people die." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but he had no idea what words could possibly save them from this situation, and he wondered if this was how humanity's expansion into the stars would end, not with the bang of glorious battle, but with the whimper of defeated explorers. But before he could say anything, Lisa stepped forward in her energy cage and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire throne room with surprising clarity and confidence. "Your Majesty," she said, using the formal address that her diplomatic training had taught her. "Perhaps you should ask me about our weapons, since I am the one who actually understands them." King Vorthak's 6 eyes turned toward her with interest, and Jake felt a mixture of hope and terror as he realized that Lisa had some kind of plan, but he had no idea what it might be or whether it could possibly work against such overwhelming power. "You interest me, female human," the bank king said. "Tell me about these weapons that have allowed your species to spread so quickly across my galaxy." Lisa Hayes stepped forward within her energy cage and studied the massive alien king with the careful attention of a diplomat, trained to read the subtle signs of power and weakness. And what she saw in King Vorthak's throne room told her everything. She needed to know about the Zephyrian Empire. The conquered species that served as courtiers and guards moved with the careful precision of beings who lived in constant fear of their master's displeasure, and Lisa noticed how they kept their eyes downcast and their voices low, as if speaking too loudly might bring terrible punishment down upon their heads. The trophies and weapons displayed around the throne room spoke of conquest through brute force and overwhelming firepower. But Lisa saw no books or art or anything that suggested the Zephyrians valued knowledge for its own sake rather than as a tool of domination. "Your Majesty," Lisa said again, using her diplomatic training to project confidence even while trapped in an energy cage. "I am Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes, and I serve as both diplomat and weapons specialist aboard our vessel." King Vorthak leaned forward on his crystal throne, and his 6 eyes fixed on her with the intensity of a predator that had found something unexpectedly interesting about its prey. "A female warrior," the king mused. "Your species continues to surprise me, human, and I am curious to hear what weapons you possess that could threaten the might of my empire." Lisa looked around the throne room, one more time taking in the fearful faces of the conquered aliens and the brutal efficiency of the Zephyrian guards, and she realized that these beings had built their empire on a foundation that had one critical weakness. "Before I reveal our greatest weapon," Lisa said, "I must ask you a question, Your Majesty, because understanding your empire will help me explain why our weapon is so effective." The king's crystalline teeth showed in what might have been amusement or annoyance, but he gestured for her to continue with one of his 6 massive hands. "How do you maintain control over 47 conquered worlds?" Lisa asked. "Surely your fleet cannot be everywhere at once, and there must be billions of beings under your rule." King Vorthak's smile grew wider as if he was pleased to discuss his methods of control, and Lisa realized that, like most tyrants, he was proud of the fear he inspired. "Fear is the foundation of order, human," the king explained. "When a species knows that rebellion brings swift and terrible punishment, they learn to obey without question." Lisa nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense, but inside she felt a growing excitement as her plan began to take shape in her mind. "And your subjects serve you willingly," she continued, "because they understand that your rule brings them benefits they could not achieve on their own." The king's expression darkened slightly, as if he sensed some kind of trap in her questions, but his arrogance prevented him from seeing where she was leading the conversation. "My subjects serve because they must," the king said. "The strong rule and the weak obey, and this is the natural order of the universe." Lisa glanced at the conquered aliens standing around the throne room and saw that some of them were listening to this exchange with more attention than they usually paid to their master's speeches. "Then you maintain your empire through force alone," Lisa said, "without the willing cooperation of your subjects or any shared vision of the future you want to build together." King Vorthak's 6 eyes narrowed as he began to suspect that this human female was leading somewhere he did not want to follow. But his curiosity about their weapons was stronger than his. Caution! "Enough questions, human," the king commanded. "Tell me about your weapons before I lose patience with your diplomatic games." Lisa took a deep breath and reached slowly into the pocket of her uniform while every weapon in the throne room turned toward her, and she could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. "This is humanity's greatest weapon," she said, pulling out a simple ballpoint pen and holding it up so that everyone in the throne room could see it clearly. Silence that followed was so complete that Lisa could hear the hum of the ship's engines and the whisper of air through the ventilation systems, and she watched as confusion spread across the faces of every alien in the room. King Vorthax stared at the small object in her hand, and his 6 eyes blinked in unison as if he could not quite process what he was seeing. "That is a writing instrument," the king said finally, and his voice carried a note of dangerous anger. "Do you mock me, human Lisa?" Held the pen steady, and her voice remained calm despite the fact that she was probably about to die for what she was going to say next. "This pen represents the weapon that allowed humanity to spread across 53 star systems in 2 centuries. She said, the weapon that builds civilizations and topples empires and changes the course of history with nothing more than marks on paper." The alien guards looked at each other uncertainly, as if they expected the pen to suddenly transform into some kind of devastating energy weapon, but it remained exactly what it appeared to be. "You speak in riddles, human." King Vorthax snarled. "That is nothing but a primitive tool for making marks, and if you think to deceive me with childish games, you will watch your crew die slowly." But Lisa noticed that some of the conquered aliens in the throne room were leaning forward slightly, as if they sensed that something important was happening, even if they did not yet understand what it was. "This pen writes ideas, Your Majesty," Lisa continued. "And ideas are the most dangerous weapons in the universe because they cannot be stopped by armor or shields or the strongest walls ever built." She held the pen higher so that everyone could see it clearly, and her voice grew stronger as she warmed to her theme. "With this pen, humans write laws that govern billions of people across dozens of worlds, and we write scientific theories that unlock the secrets of the universe, and we write stories that inspire others to dream of better futures." King Vorthax's massive frame shifted restlessly on his throne, as if he was beginning to understand that this conversation was not going where he had expected it to go. Words on paper change nothing. The king declared, "Only force and fear maintain order, and your primitive scribbling cannot threaten the might of my empire." But Lisa saw that several of the conquered aliens were now watching her with intense interest, and she realized that her words were having exactly the effect she had hoped for. "Your Majesty," she said, "would you like me to demonstrate the power of this weapon by writing something that will shake the very foundations of your empire?" The king leaned forward on his throne, and his 6 eyes burned with a mixture of curiosity and anger as he tried to understand what threat this human female could possibly pose with nothing but a writing instrument. "Do your worst, human," King Vorthax commanded. "Write whatever words you think will threaten me, and when they prove powerless, I will execute you and all your crew for wasting my time." Lisa smiled, and her expression was calm and confident as she prepared to unleash humanity's most dangerous weapon against an empire, built on fear and ignorance. "Very well, Your Majesty," she said. "I will write the 3 most dangerous words in any language and watch what happens when your subjects learn to read them." She raised the pen toward an imaginary piece of paper and spoke. The words she would write in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the throne room. We are free. The 3 words hung in the air of the throne room, like a challenge thrown down before the most powerful being in the galaxy, and Lisa watched as their meaning rippled through the assembled crowd of conquered aliens like a stone dropped into still. Water King Vorthak's 6 eyes blazed with fury as he realized that this human female had just spoken words that struck at the very heart of everything his empire represented, and his voice shook the walls when he roared his response. Freedom is an illusion human, and those words are meaningless noise that cannot change the reality of power and submission. But Lisa noticed that several of the conquered aliens had straightened slightly as if hearing those words had reminded them of something they had forgotten during their years of servitude, and she knew that her weapon was already beginning to work. "Your Majesty," Lisa said, "may I tell you a story about what happens when ideas like freedom are written down and shared among people who have never heard them before?" The king gestured impatiently with one of his 6 hands, but his curiosity was stronger than his anger, and he wanted to understand what threat this human thought she could pose with nothing but words. "Speak quickly, human, before I lose patience with your games." Lisa began to pace within her energy cage, and her voice took on the rhythm of a natural storyteller as she began to weave her tale. "On our homeworld, there was once a king much like yourself who ruled through fear and kept his people ignorant so they would not question his authority, and for many years this system worked perfectly." She paused and looked directly at some of the conquered aliens who were listening with growing attention to her words. But then someone wrote down the idea that all people are born with certain rights that no king can take away, and they wrote that governments should serve the people rather than the other way around. King Vorthak shifted restlessly on his throne, as if he sensed danger in these simple words but could not quite identify where the threat was coming from. These ideas were written on simple paper with instruments no more advanced than this pen. Lisa continued, holding up her ballpoint. Pen. And then something amazing happened. She turned to address not just the king, but every being in the throne room, and her voice grew stronger as she warmed to her subject. The ideas spread from person to person like fire through dry grass, and people who had never questioned their king's authority suddenly began to ask why one person should have absolute power over millions. Some of the conquered aliens were now listening with obvious fascination, and Lisa could see in their eyes the spark of something that had been dormant for too long. The king tried to stop the spread of these ideas by burning the papers and executing anyone caught reading them. But it was too late because ideas once released cannot be destroyed. King Vorthak leaned forward on his throne, and his voice carried a note of unease that had not been there before. "What happened to this king human?" Lisa smiled, and her answer was delivered with quiet satisfaction. His people rose up not with weapons, but with the shared belief that they deserved better, and they replaced him with a government that served them instead of enslaving them. The throne room was silent, except for the distant hum of the ship's engines, and Lisa could feel the tension in the air as her words sank into the minds of beings who had accepted their slavery as inevitable. "You speak of ancient history," human King Vorthak said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "My empire is built on superior technology and military. Might not the primitive superstitions of your home world Lisa nodded as if agreeing with him, but her next words struck like a blade aimed at the heart of his certainty. Your Majesty, how many of your subjects serve you because they believe in your cause, and how many serve because they are afraid to resist? The king's crystalline teeth showed in a snarl, but he did not answer the question, and Lisa pressed her advantage. An empire built on fear alone is like a building constructed on sand, and it takes only the right idea at the right moment to bring it all crashing down. She turned to address the conquered aliens directly, and her voice carried the authority of someone who believed absolutely in what she was saying. Every being in this room was born free, and that freedom is not something that can be given or taken away by any king, no matter how powerful. Several of the alien courtiers stepped back as if her words were physically dangerous, and Lisa saw that some of the guards were looking uncertainly at their weapons as if wondering whether they should stop this human from speaking. Silence. King Vorthak roared, "Your words change nothing, human, and fear will always triumph over your pretty ideals." But Lisa continued, speaking as if she had not heard his command. "Fear is powerful, Your Majesty, but it requires constant effort to maintain, while freedom is an idea that spreads naturally because every sentient being recognizes its truth." She held up her pen again and addressed the entire throne room. "This simple tool has written documents that freed billions of people across thousands of worlds, and it has recorded scientific discoveries that improved the lives of entire species," Dr. Amy Foster spoke up from. Her energy cage and her voice carried the authority of someone who had dedicated her life to healing. "On our worlds, we write medical knowledge that saves lives, and we share it freely with anyone who wants to learn, regardless of their species or their government." Engineer Pete Collins added his own voice to the growing chorus. "We write down our technological discoveries and trade them with other species so that everyone benefits from new knowledge, instead of hoarding it for ourselves." Security. Chief Rick Barnes surprised everyone by speaking in a voice gentle enough to address children. "We write laws that protect the weak from the strong, and we teach those laws to our children so they will grow up knowing that might does not make right." King Vorthak looked around his throne room, and for the first time in his long reign, he saw something that chilled him more than any weapon ever could, and that was the sight of his own subjects listening to these humans with expressions of hope and curiosity. "Enough!" the king bellowed. "Guards, execute these humans immediately before their poison spreads any further." But something unprecedented happened in the throne room of the most feared ruler in the galaxy, and that was the sound of hesitation. As the guards looked at each other uncertainly, instead of immediately obeying their master's command, one of the conquered aliens stepped forward, and Lisa recognized him as a member of a species she had never seen before, with pale blue skin and large eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. "Your Majesty," the alien said in a voice that trembled with the effort of speaking, "might we be permitted to learn more about these ideas before the humans are executed?" The silence that followed was so profound that everyone in the throne room could hear their own heartbeats, and Lisa realized that her weapon had found its target, and the revolution of minds had already begun. The stars looked different through the viewing port of the human exploration vessel Horizon's Edge, but Captain Jake Morrison had seen enough strange skies to know that difference meant danger, and today the danger came in the form of ships that appeared on their sensors like dark shadows against the cosmic light. Jake stood on the bridge watching the massive alien fleet emerge from what seemed like empty space, and he counted at least 50 vessels, each one larger than his own ship, and bristling with weapons that glowed with an energy signature his science officer had never seen before. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes stood beside him, holding her translation device and checking the diplomatic protocols she had memorized for first contact situations, but nothing in her training had prepared her for ships that could appear from nowhere and surround them before they could even send a distress signal. The communication console crackled to life, and a voice spoke in a language that sounded like grinding metal mixed with the roar of distant thunder, but Lisa's device quickly translated the words into something that made Jake's blood run cold. Human vessel. You will surrender your weapons and prepare to be boarded, or we will destroy you where you drift among the stars. Jake looked at his crew and saw the fear in their eyes, but also the determination that made humans dangerous when cornered, and he knew that whatever these aliens wanted, they would not get it without. A fight engineer, Pete Collins, worked frantically at his station trying to boost their shield power, while medical officer Dr. Amy Foster prepared the sickbay for casualties, and security, Chief Rick Barnes, checked his weapon systems knowing they would likely be useless against such overwhelming force. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge, Jake said into the communication channel. We come in peace and wish to establish diplomatic relations with your people. The alien voice laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass that made everyone on the bridge wince, and Lisa's translation device struggled to convey the contempt in those harsh syllables. Peace is for the weak human, and your kind will learn to serve the Zephyrian Empire as all others have learned before you. The largest ship in the alien fleet moved closer, and Jake could see that it was built like a weapon itself, with sharp angles and surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect. It and along its hull were markings that looked like battle scars from 1,000 conquered worlds. We represent the United Earth Government, Lisa said, stepping forward. Surely we can discuss terms that benefit both our peoples, but even as she spoke, the alien ships opened fire with weapons that did not destroy but drained, and Jake watched helplessly as his ship's power systems began to fail one by one like candles being snuffed out by an unseen hand. The lights on the bridge dimmed, and the artificial gravity fluctuated, making everyone grab for handholds while Pete called out damage reports that grew worse with each passing second. Shields down to 20% and falling, Pete shouted over the sound of failing systems. Whatever. They're hitting us with it's not trying to destroy us, it's trying to disable us. Jake realized with growing horror that the aliens were not interested in killing them quickly and cleanly, but wanted them alive for reasons he did not want to imagine, and he ordered his crew to prepare for boarding while knowing their weapons would be useless against beings who could build ships that appeared from nothing. The alien vessel moved alongside the Horizon's Edge, with a grace that belied its massive size and mechanical arms extended to lock the two ships together while Lisa tried desperately to establish some kind of meaningful communication. We have technologies we can share, she said into the communication channel. Knowledge that could benefit your empire if you would only listen to reason. The alien voice spoke again, and this time the contempt was mixed with something like amusement, as if they found human desperation entertaining. Your knowledge belongs to us now, human as do, your lives and your world, and you will surrender everything you possess or watch your species burn. The airlock cycled open and the aliens came aboard in force, and Jake's first sight of them made him understand why they called themselves an empire. because they moved with the absolute confidence of beings who had never known defeat. They stood 12 feet tall with 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through metal, and their skin was covered in crystalline armor that seemed to grow from their bodies rather than being worn, and their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence and cruelty in equal measure. The leader of the boarding party surveyed the human bridge with the air of someone cataloging new possessions, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Commander Thrax of the vessel Dark Star, and you are now prisoners of King Vorthak, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire and master of 47 conquered worlds." Jake stepped forward, knowing it might be the last act of defiance he would ever make, but unable to remain silent in the face of such arrogance. "We are explorers, not conquerors," he said. "We seek knowledge and friendship among the stars, not domination, Commander." Thrax laughed, and it was a sound like breaking bones that made everyone on the bridge step back involuntarily. "Your friendship means nothing human, and your knowledge belongs to the strong, and we are the strongest beings in this galaxy, as your world will soon learn." Energy bonds appeared around each member of the crew, binding them with bands of light that felt solid as steel, and Jake found himself unable to move as the aliens began searching his ship with the efficiency of beings who had done this many times before. "Take everything of value," Commander Thrax ordered his soldiers. "Scan their computers and download all their data files, and bring the captain and his senior officers to the king." Lisa watched helplessly as alien soldiers dismantled her diplomatic equipment and copied their star charts, and she realized that everything humanity had learned about space travel and exploration was now in the hands of beings who would use it to bring destruction to Earth. They were herded through the airlock onto the alien ship, and Jake's last sight of the horizon's edge was of alien soldiers stripping it bare like carrion birds picking clean a carcass, and he wondered if anyone on Earth would ever know what had happened to his crew. The interior of the alien ship was vast and dark, with corridors that seemed to stretch forever, and everywhere they looked were trophies from conquered worlds and the skulls of defeated enemies, and the message was clear that resistance was futile, and surrender was the only option. But as they were marched through the ship toward whatever fate awaited them, Jake noticed something that gave him a small spark of hope, and that was the way some of the alien crew members looked at them, with something that might have been curiosity rather than hatred. Perhaps not all the beings serving the Zephyrian Empire were there by choice, and perhaps somewhere in this dark vessel were allies waiting to be found, but first they would have to survive their meeting with King Vorthak, and Jake suspected that would be the greatest challenge any of them had ever faced.